So over the next week, Harry tries to think of how he can get the memory from Slughorn, but nothing comes to him, so he starts looking in the Half-Blood Prince's book for help. This is when he notices the Sectumsempra spell marked For Enemies. It'll be a while before he actually uses it, though. Ron and Hermione are set to take apparition tests near the end of April, though Harry can't because he's not 17 yet. As Hermione corrects some errors on Ron's homework, thanks to one of Fred and George's faulty spell-checking quills, Ron is pretty clearly in love with her and talks about how much he wishes Lavender would just dump him, because he doesn't want to be the one to dump her. The more I hint I want to finish it, the tighter she holds on. It's like going out with the giant squid. This is when Dobby and Kreacher show up to report Malfoy's activities to Harry. Kreacher is deliberately unhelpful, simply reporting on everyday activities Malfoy's been doing. Dobby, however, informs Harry that Malfoy has been regularly going to the Room of Requirement, with a variety of students standing watch for him while he's there. At one point, Dobby's old fears about insulting his former master come back to him, and he tries to chuck himself into the fireplace, but Harry stops him. After dismissing the two elves, Harry realizes that the reason Malfoy has been disappearing from the Marauders' map is because he's been in the Room of Requirement, which doesn't show up on it. As the trio wonder why he's apparently let a variety of students in on his plans like Dobby said, Harry figures out that it isn't a variety at all. Malfoy stole some of the Polyjuice potion from Slughorn's first class, and has been having Crabbe and Goyle drink it to turn into other people so as to seem less suspicious as they stand watch. The next morning, at breakfast, Hermione reads the news in the Daily Prophet. Apparently Mundungus has been arrested for impersonating an Inferius while attempting to rob someone. Someone named Octavius Pepper has gone missing, and a 9-year-old boy has been arrested for trying to murder his own parents, presumably under the Imperius curse. During his free period, Harry plans to try to get into the Room of Requirement to see what Malfoy's up to in there, though Hermione thinks he's wasting his time and should be focusing on getting Slughorn's memory. Unfortunately, it turns out she's right, as no matter how hard Harry tries to get into the Room of Requirement to turn into the place it becomes for Malfoy, it refuses to appear for him. We then see another Defense Against the Dark Arts class with Snape, where Snape orders Harry to explain the difference between a ghost and an Inferius. Harry's response? Well, ghosts are transparent. Snape, of course, sneers at this answer and goes into the technical difference, but as Ron rightfully points out, what Harry said is the most important thing when trying to tell them apart.
Another 10 points from Gryffindor. I would expect nothing more sophisticated from you, Ronald Weasley. The boy's so solid he cannot operate half an inch across a room.
Jeez, what a dick. Harry and Ron go into the boys' bathroom after the class, where they encounter moaning Myrtle. Apparently she's been coming to visit and comfort a boy who's been crying in here. As we later learn, she's actually talking about Malfoy. This relationship between Myrtle and Malfoy is pretty interesting. Right now, Malfoy is feeling very isolated from everyone else. He's feeling the stress of the mission Voldemort gave him and is worried he won't be able to fulfill it and that he and his family will be killed. And there's no one he can share those feelings with. So Myrtle, someone who feels similarly lonely, becomes a source of comfort for him and vice versa. Which is particularly interesting seeing as Myrtle is Muggle-born, something Malfoy despises. He probably doesn't know about that, though. I do kind of wish they had incorporated this into the movie, but at the same time, I understand if they didn't feel they had time for it. That weekend, Ron and Hermione go to Hogsmeade for some apparition practice sessions, and Harry decides to take another crack at the Room of Requirement. He finds Goyle standing outside dressed as a little girl, and, well, it's pretty funny.
Hello. You're very pretty, aren't you?
Unfortunately, this attempt to open the room is just as unsuccessful as the last one. He does, however, meet Tonks. Apparently she's come to see Dumbledore and asks Harry whether he's received letters from anyone in the Order lately. Harry says he hasn't, and when he mentions Sirius, she starts to tear up. She leaves, and on his way back to Gryffindor Tower, Harry starts to theorize that she may have been in love with Sirius, even though he's her cousin. Gross. Given how she teared up when he mentioned his name, and thinking that the new form of her Patronus might have been Sirius's dog form. Of course, in reality, it's Lupin she fell in love with, and the shape of her Patronus is his wolf form. The reason she came to see Dumbledore was because the Order received news that a 5-year-old boy had been killed by Fenrir Greyback. Apparently his mother refused to help the Death Eaters, so Greyback killed her son in revenge. Sometime later, the trio receive a letter from Hagrid informing them of Aragog's death and asking them to come down to his hut that evening to help bury him. All three of them are incredulous that Hagrid would ask them to do such a thing, knowing that it would mean breaking the rules. And Ron in particular is adamant against the idea of helping bury the thing that told its children to eat him and Harry. Ultimately, they decide not to go. However, they do start talking about Slughorn and how Harry can get the memory from him. And this is when they come up with the idea to use the Felix Felicis potion. In the book, it's actually Ron's idea, which I really like. Sadly, this is yet another moment he doesn't get in the movies. Harry is initially reluctant, as he had been planning to use it to help him get with Ginny, but he ultimately relents and agrees to use it if he can't persuade Slughorn in their class today. He fails, of course, so he decides to use the potion. Upon meeting up with Ron and Hermione, he learns that Hermione passed her apparition test, while Ron just barely failed. Apparently he left half an eyebrow behind, which, come on, give him the pass. So the trio work out a plan for Harry to follow after he's taken the potion, not realizing that the potion is going to render that completely useless by showing him exactly what he needs to do. In the movie, Harry drinks the entire thing, but in the book he leaves about half of it. This remaining half turns out to be useful to his friends at the end of the book. I think the movie portrayed the effects of Felix Felicis really well. Harry is suddenly filled with a sort of manic confidence and knows exactly what he needs to do.
Right. I'm going down to Hagrid's.
What? No, Harry, you've got to go and speak to Slughorn. We have a plan.
I know, but I've got a really good feeling about Hagrid's. I feel it's the place to be tonight. Do you know what I mean?
No.
I really like Daniel Radcliffe's acting here, too. He plays this so differently than in the rest of the movies, and I think he's really funny.
Hi! Sorry, sir. I should have announced myself. Cleared my throat. Coughed. You probably feared I was Professor Sprout. Are those tentacular leaves, sir?
Harry!
Sir.
It's the eyes, I reckon. They unnerve some folk.
Not to mention the pincers.
So Harry finds Slughorn in the greenhouse and brings him down to Hagrid's hut where they bury Aragog, and Slughorn gives a speech, after extracting some venom from Aragog's corpse, for
academic purposes, you understand.
They go into Hagrid's hut, where Hagrid and Slughorn get drunk, and Harry manages to talk Slughorn into giving him the memory. And to be honest, I think this scene is better in the movie than in the book. In both versions, Harry uses Slughorn's fondness for Lily to persuade him into giving up the memory, as well as revealing to him that he is indeed the Chosen One.
I am the Chosen One. Only I can destroy him, but in order to do so, I need to know what Tom Riddle asked you all those years ago in your office, and I need to know what you told him.
But something about the way the movie does it makes it feel much more personal, whereas in the book, at least to me, it feels more like Harry's manipulating Slughorn. Not to say it's not still emotional, you can still see how much Slughorn cared for Lily. He even tears up when talking about her. But Harry doesn't seem to get emotional at all. He seems to just be using Slughorn's emotions to get what he needs. He even acknowledges in his internal narration that Slughorn won't remember any of this tomorrow. In the movie, it seems more like there's a genuine emotional connection between the two over the loss of Lily. I especially love this story Slughorn tells about Francis the goldfish, which wasn't in the book at all.
It was a student who gave me Francis. On a spring afternoon, I discovered a bowl on my desk, with just a few inches of clear water in it. Floating on the surface was a flower petal. As I watched, it sank just before it reached the bottom. It's transformed to a wee fish. It was beautiful magic. Wondrous to behold. The flower petal had come from a lily, your mother. The day I came downstairs, the day the bowl was empty, was the day your mother.
And Harry uses that when trying to talk Slughorn into giving him the memory.
Be brave like my mother. Otherwise, you disgrace her. Otherwise, she died for nothing. Otherwise, the bowl will remain empty forever.
I just think this was a really great addition and made this whole scene feel all the more emotional. Especially when you add this moment where Harry steadies Slughorn's hand while he's depositing the memory in the file. I also really like this line from Slughorn.
You've no idea what he was like even then.
Slughorn was just one of many people who were tricked into doing the Dark Lord's bidding. It's also worth mentioning that in the book, Slughorn comes across much more greedy in his interactions with Hagrid. While he puts on a good show of it, he doesn't seem to be all that sensitive to Hagrid's loss. He's just using the occasion to his advantage so he can discreetly take some valuable acromantula venom from Aragog. In the movie, he just straight up asks Hagrid if he can take some. I personally like this better. One minor change that I'm mostly indifferent towards is that in the movie, Slughorn is sneaking into the greenhouse to steal plants, whereas in the book, he's getting them directly from Professor Sprout with no stealing or sneaking involved. Also, as Harry's leaving Gryffindor Tower, in the book he ends up ruining both Ron and Lavender's, as well as Ginny and Dean's relationships. As he's under the invisibility cloak, Lavender sees Ron and Hermione come out of the boys' dormitory seemingly alone together and furiously ends their relationship, much to Ron's relief. And as he's leaving, Harry accidentally brushes against Ginny, who snaps at Dean, thinking he was trying to help her through the portrait hole when she's quite capable of doing it herself. But moving on, Harry successfully gets the memory and brings it to Dumbledore. In the book, he's initially going back to Gryffindor Tower as he knows Dumbledore was away, before Nearly Headless Nick shows up and tells him Dumbledore has returned, causing him to rush straight to his office. Dumbledore is actually described as being stunned when Harry tells him he got the memory. Man, Harry stunned Dumbledore. That's impressive. So the two of them view the full memory of Slughorn telling Riddle about Horcruxes, and after viewing it, they discuss what it means. So I was just talking about a scene that I thought the movie did better than the book. This scene, unfortunately, is not one of those. I mean, this was a big moment in the book. We finally learn the secret of Voldemort's not dyingness, as well as what needs to be done to finally kill him. The movie kind of rushes through it, though. Dumbledore just briefly reveals to Harry that the diary he destroyed was a Horcrux, as well as a ring that belonged to Voldemort's mother, which we've only gotten a few glimpses of in the movie. What's also weird is that, like in the book, he tells Harry that he's been searching for the Horcruxes, he even destroyed the ring, and yet just after they leave the memory, he says,
This is beyond anything I imagined.
Clearly it wasn't though, because you've been looking for the Horcruxes. I guess you could maybe argue that it's simply the amount of Horcruxes Voldemort made that he's referring to, so okay, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt on that one. It doesn't change the fact that this scene tells us way too little. In the book, Harry and Dumbledore actually discuss and work out what each of the Horcruxes could be. First of all, unlike in the movie, Dumbledore makes it clear that there are only 6 Horcruxes, not 7. Okay, there technically are 7, as we learn in Deathly Hallows that Harry himself was unintentionally made into one, but that's beside the point. Not only does the movie not make this clear, but it also kind of implies that destroying the Horcruxes will destroy Voldemort. Kind of like destroying the ring destroyed Sauron. No, even after destroying the Horcruxes, Voldemort himself still needs to be killed. Dumbledore also says in the movie,
Could be anything. Most commonplace of objects.
This isn't the case in the book, but I feel like they probably had to go with it in the movie because they didn't really go into Voldemort's past. One of the things we learned about Voldemort in the book was his tendency to collect trophies. As such, he wouldn't have used everyday objects for his Horcruxes. He would have specifically chosen objects he believed worthy of that honor. The diary was proof that he was the heir of Slytherin, and the ring belonged to the Gaunt family, the last descendants of Salazar Slytherin. As such, Dumbledore and Harry work out that the cup and locket he stole from Hepzibah Smith are likely to be Horcruxes as well, as they had belonged to Helga Hufflepuff and Salazar Slytherin respectively. They also work out that he probably set out to find objects belonging to Gryffindor and Ravenclaw to use as his last 2 Horcruxes. But since the only known relic of Gryffindor's, the sword, is definitely not a Horcrux, he probably didn't find one of Gryffindor's. Dumbledore then explains his theory to Harry that Nagini is the 6th Horcrux, as Voldemort actually seems to care about her, something he doesn't do for anyone else, and has an unusual amount of control over her, even for a Parselmouth. So in the book, we actually know what 3 of the 4 remaining Horcruxes are already. It's just the Diadem of Ravenclaw that we don't know yet. And Harry himself, but even Voldemort didn't know about that one. Dumbledore explains to Harry how he found the ring in the ruin of the Gaunt's old house and how it injured his hand. Of course, he's not telling the full story here in two ways. First of all, he's actually dying from this injury, and second, the injury occurred because he tried to use the resurrection stone in the ring to talk to his parents and sister again. But in any case, this highlights that much like how they determined what each Horcrux was, the hiding places likewise are probably places Voldemort has a connection with. I like this because it means that Harry has to use his knowledge of his enemy in order to ultimately defeat him. In the movie, he just seems to figure things out by tapping into his and Voldemort's connection. But that's the next movie, so I won't go into it here. It does kind of relate to another difference here, though. In the book, Dumbledore says that because of how much Voldemort has mutilated his soul, he can't feel when a Horcrux is destroyed, whereas in the movies, he does seem to feel it. Dumbledore does explain in both versions that it was when Harry delivered the diary to him at the end of his second year that he began to suspect that Voldemort was using Horcruxes, as that was clearly what the diary itself was. What made him realize that there were probably more, as he explains in the book, was the fact that Voldemort seemed to want the diary to get into someone else's hands, so the Chamber of Secrets could be opened again, and he gave it to Lucius Malfoy for precisely this purpose. In which case, he was being pretty reckless with the piece of soul inside it, which probably meant that he had made more of them, or at least been planning to make more. And with this memory, Dumbledore now knows that the exact number is 6. The book emphasizes a bit more how dark this is, as before Voldemort, even the worst wizards never split their soul more than once. This constant soul splitting is why Voldemort now looks the way he does. It's also worth noting here that Lucius Malfoy had no idea the diary was a Horcrux. He just thought it was enchanted to open the chamber. So, when he thought Voldemort was dead, he decided to proceed with the plan for his own purposes, to discredit Arthur Weasley, have Dumbledore thrown out of Hogwarts, and get rid of the diary, which was a highly incriminating object. All of this information is stuff I think should have been given to us in the movie. But the part of this scene that I'm most upset they cut comes after Harry and Dumbledore have worked everything out. The movie makes it seem like Harry is simply destined to kill Voldemort thanks to the prophecy. Like he doesn't really have a choice in the grand scheme of things. And in the books, this is how it looks at the end of Order of the Phoenix. But in this scene, Dumbledore emphasizes to Harry that this isn't the case. Harry's having doubts about his ability to defeat Voldemort, and this is partially because he's looking at the situation as something he's being forced into. As Dumbledore tells him, though, not every prophecy ever made has been fulfilled. The only reason this particular one is because Voldemort acted on it. Voldemort created his own worst enemy. Not only did his attack on Harry give Harry powers he never would have had, but it gave Harry the drive and determination to see Voldemort defeated for good. In other words, one of them will have to kill the other like the prophecy says, but only because Voldemort will not rest until he's killed Harry, which means it's Harry's choice whether to lie down and take it or to fight back.
But sir, it all comes down to the same thing, doesn't it? I've got to try and kill him, or...
Got to? Of course you've got to. But not because of the prophecy, because you yourself will never rest until you've tried. We both know it. Imagine, please, just for a moment, that you had never heard of that prophecy. How would you feel about Voldemort now? Think.
Harry watched Dumbledore striding up and down in front of him and thought. He thought of his mother, his father, and Sirius. He thought of Cedric Diggory. He thought of all the terrible deeds he knew Voldemort had done. A flame seemed to leap inside his chest, searing his throat. I'd want him finished, and I'd want to do it. From this moment, Harry fully embraces the Chosen One title. Not because of any sort of ego, but purely because of his own will to finish Voldemort. The fact that the movie didn't include this is one of my biggest complaints. It's another example of the movies not doing enough to emphasize the themes of the series. Harry doesn't want to be famous. He doesn't want to be special. But he does want to see justice served to the person who's caused so much death and destruction. And he wants to be the one to do it. So yeah, the movie really didn't do this scene justice at all. That said, I do love this line.
Once again, I must ask too much of you, Harry.
Especially the way it then cuts to Dumbledore with Snape, and Snape saying,
Have you ever considered that you ask too much, that you take too much
for granted.
Incidentally, this is the conversation Hagrid overheard in the book, just moved up here. So this is obviously the scene where Harry and Dumbledore set out to find the locket Horcrux. However, we don't go there yet in the book. In the book, Dumbledore does promise to take Harry with him when he tracks down the Horcrux, but he hasn't found it yet. Also, Harry actually asks to come along in the book. So following the conversation with Dumbledore, Harry tells Ron and Hermione all about the Horcruxes and that Dumbledore is going to take him with him to help destroy one of them. He also learns from them that Ron split up with Lavender and Ginny split up with Dean. He then has an internal argument about whether it would be right or safe to hook up with his best friend's sister. As they enter the Gryffindor common room, they find that Katie has returned from St. Mungo's, and this is where they ask her if she remembers who gave her the necklace, but she doesn't remember. All she remembers is going into the girls' bathroom at the Three Broomsticks, and then her mind went blank as she was imperious. Harry considers having a go at the Room of Requirement again after drinking more Felix Felicis, but as Hermione points out,
That would be a complete waste of potion. Luck can only get you so far, Harry. The situation with Slughorn was different. You always had the ability to persuade him. You just needed to tweak the circumstances a bit.
Ron suggests they make more of it, but when Hermione looks up the recipe, she finds it takes 6 months to make. Again, a clever way for Rowling to write off an incredibly powerful plot device so it can't be used again after it's served its purpose in the story. We see the Gryffindor Quidditch team preparing for their upcoming match against Ravenclaw. Ginny seems to be taking her breakup with Dean pretty well, as she's pretty much the life of the team. Harry continues to internally debate about whether he should try to date her and starts to feel like the outcome of this match is directly tied to his chances with her. Unfortunately, Harry will not get to take part in this match. While watching the Marauders map one day, Harry sees Malfoy in a bathroom along with Moaning Myrtle, and his curiosity gets the better of him. He goes there and finds Malfoy crying, with Myrtle comforting him. Malfoy is upset that he can't do something and terrified of Voldemort killing him for his failure. He then notices Harry, and this is where the two of them have their fight, and Harry uses Sectumsempra on him, not knowing what it does. I think this scene was done well in the movie. I like the fight, and while we don't hear Malfoy voice his feelings beforehand, I think simply showing him crying gets it across well enough, especially since we hear his true feelings later in the movie when he's confronting Dumbledore. After Harry unintentionally injures Malfoy, Snape comes in and heals him using an incantation that's described as sounding like a song. Unlike in the movie where Harry simply walks out after a silent glare from Snape, in the book, Harry watches Snape heal Malfoy, and then as Snape leaves to take Malfoy to the hospital wing, he furiously orders Harry to stay here until he comes back. Yeah, there's no way Snape would let Harry get away with injuring his favorite student without some sort of punishment. It's also pretty clear in the book that Harry is horrified by what he's done. As much as he hates Malfoy, he never would have used a spell like that on him if he knew what it would do. Snape returns and demands to know where Harry learned that spell. In hindsight, he probably knows the truth already, since it was him who came up with it and wrote it in his textbook. Still, he uses legitimacy to look into Harry's mind, where he learns about said textbook and orders him to bring him all of his school books. Harry runs back to Gryffindor Tower, and this is where he decides to hide the Half-Blood Prince's textbook in the Room of Requirement. In the movie, of course, it's Hermione and Ginny who make him hide it, and a seemingly despondent Harry agrees. Ginny takes him to the Room of Requirement, the version of it that basically functions as a massive storage room, and makes him close his eyes as she hides the book, and then kisses him. This kiss happens later in the book, so I'll talk about it then. In the book, Harry hides the textbook on his own while also taking Ron's to present to Snape. And unlike in the movie, where he's allowing the book to be hidden from him because he seemingly agrees now that it's too dangerous, in the book, it's pretty much the opposite. He's hiding it so it won't be taken from him, and after the initial shock of horror upon seeing that spell, when Hermione starts saying, "I told you so," something she never seems able to resist doing, he actually continues making excuses for the prince. Again, I like this because much like he accuses Dumbledore of doing, he too is blindly trusting Snape, even if he doesn't know it. Interestingly, even Ginny sticks up for Harry when Hermione starts lecturing him and the two of them get in a fight. Not like the movie where they seem to be completely in agreement. Again, the movies really don't do Ginny justice. But anyway, Harry takes the book to the room of requirement where he hides it in a cupboard, and to make it more distinctive so he'll be able to find it later, he places an ugly bust on top of the cupboard and places an old tiara on the bust's head. This is something Harry will remember in Deathly Hallows, as this tiara is in fact Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem and one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. There's also another object mentioned among the many others here, the vanishing cabinet the twins forced Montague into last year. Unbeknownst to Harry, this is the very object Malfoy has been working on all year. So after hiding the book, he returns to Snape and presents Ron's book as his own. Snape doesn't buy it for a second and gives Harry detention at 10 o'clock every Sunday for the rest of the term. Given what Harry just did to Malfoy, this doesn't seem like that unfair a punishment. But of course, it's Snape. You know he specifically chose that time so Harry wouldn't be able to play in the Quidditch match. I will say though, in a subtle way, I think Snape kind of shows his true colors here. Not only has Harry grievously injured another student, but Snape has proof that he's been cheating in potions, and Harry is lying to him about it. In short, Snape now has a legitimate excuse to have Harry expelled, something he's been threatening for years. And yet, he doesn't, because it's always been an empty threat. He knows Harry would be in way too much danger if he left Hogwarts. So that Saturday, Harry goes to Snape's office for detention while the rest of his Quidditch team plays in the match. Ginny takes over his place as Seeker, and her Chaser position is taken by Dean. In detention, Snape has Harry rewrite the records of past wrongdoers and their punishments, as a lot of them have faded or decayed over time. And Snape, being the prick he is, has Harry start with a box including records of his father, Sirius, and their friends, even reading one of them out loud. After the detention, Harry returns to the Gryffindor common room where he finds a huge celebration taking place. Gryffindor won the match. Ginny runs up and hugs him, and Harry, caught up in the moment and not even thinking about it, kisses her. So very different from in the movie, where Ginny kisses Harry privately in the room of requirement. In the book, it's Harry who kisses her in front of 50 people. That shows a lot more confidence on his part and gives him more agency in the situation. In fact, that's kind of an issue I have with the movies as a whole, at least the later ones. Because of some of the changes made, as well as the lack of access to his thoughts and feelings, it often feels like Harry is just being pulled along for the ride on things. Hell, the whole thing I recently mentioned about him having a choice in being the chosen one is a perfect example of that. He comes across as much more proactive in the books. Again, though, the earlier movies don't really have this problem. It's mainly the later ones. As for Harry and Ginny's relationship, I've pretty much said my thoughts, but to reiterate, I think they work much better in the book. I do think Harry's feelings for her were a bit sudden even in the book, but at least in the book I understood where they came from, as I feel like they had some sort of special bond even before that. I never felt that in the movies, and that's largely because of Ginny not having much of a character in them. I just don't get why Harry fell in love with her in the movies. And none of that is on Bonnie Wright. She plays the part well. It's a problem in the writing. So a bit of time passes as Harry and Ginny continue to date. It made a very nice change to be talked about because of something that was making him happier than he could remember being for a very long time, rather than because he had been involved in horrific scenes of dark magic. Since Ginny's taking her owls this year, though, they can't spend too much time together anymore. One day, Hermione approaches Harry to talk about the Half-Blood Prince and some info she dug up about someone named Eileen Prince. She thinks this might be the Half-Blood Prince, since there are no actual wizard princes, so it would make sense for it to be the person's last name. Harry doubts this, saying that he can tell from the prince's writing style that it's a guy. In the end, they both turn out to be right. Harry is right about it being a guy because, of course, it's Snape, and Hermione's right because Eileen Prince is Snape's mother, who married a muggle, hence why Snape is a half-blood prince. Harry then receives a letter from Dumbledore telling him to come to his office. Obviously, he's found a Horcrux. Harry heads toward the office, but along the way, he runs into Professor Trelawney. It seems she's just been thrown out of the room of requirement. Apparently, she was going in there to hide some personal items, aka alcohol, and heard what she describes as gleeful cheering before the occupant threw her out. As Harry figures out, this was Malfoy celebrating because he's finally finished his job. He's fixed the vanishing cabinet. Harry suggests she tell Dumbledore what happened to her, and the two of them head towards the office together. Along the way, Trelawney starts talking about her first interview with Dumbledore, which of course was when she made the prophecy about Harry, and Harry learns some shocking news. The Death Eater who overheard part of the prophecy and reported it to Voldemort was Snape. This is something that was never revealed in the movies. I guess it wasn't 100% necessary, but it does add to the complexity of Snape's character, and explains more of the reasons for his actions. When Snape reported the prophecy to Voldemort, he was still on Voldemort's side, but when Voldemort targeted Lily's son, that was when Snape realized what a huge mistake he had made, and went to Dumbledore to protect Lily. Upon hearing this, Harry tells Trelawney to stay here as he runs up to see Dumbledore alone, this piece of news making him completely forget about the Horcrux. When he arrives, Dumbledore tells him he found a Horcrux in the cave Tom Riddle tormented 2 fellow children from the orphanage in. He then recognizes that something's bothering Harry and asks what's wrong, to which Harry angrily lashes out at Dumbledore for not telling him that Snape was the one who had told Voldemort about the prophecy, and for letting Snape teach here even though he had a hand in Harry's parents' deaths. Dumbledore tries to tell Harry about how remorseful Snape was after causing their deaths, but Harry swiftly brushes that off, as Snape hated his father. He asks Dumbledore straight up why he's so sure Snape is on their side, but Dumbledore won't give him a full answer.
Dumbledore did not speak for a moment. It looked as though he was trying to make up his mind about something. At last he said,
I am sure. I trust Severus Snape completely.
I think he was considering telling Harry the truth about Snape, but ultimately decided against it as he had promised Snape he would tell no one. Unfortunately, because he won't give Harry a straight answer, it's difficult for Harry to trust him on this. He continues to rail against Snape and tells Dumbledore about what Trelawney heard in the Room of Requirement, that Malfoy seems to have finally finished what he's been doing all year, and accuses Dumbledore of leaving the school unprotected. Dumbledore doesn't appreciate this.
Enough! Do you think that I have once left the school unprotected during my absences this year? I have not. Tonight, when I leave, there will again be additional protection in place. Please do not suggest that I do not take the safety of my students seriously, Harry.
Despite this, though, Dumbledore still agrees to take Harry with him to destroy the Horcrux. He tells Harry to get his invisibility cloak and then to meet him in the entrance hall. Harry does go to Gryffindor Tower, but when he's there, he tells Ron and Hermione about what's going on, and still not trusting too much in Dumbledore's extra protection, tells them to watch Snape and Malfoy on the Marauders map, and to gather any DA members they can to help them. He also gives them what's left of the Felix Felicis to split between themselves and Ginny, just in case. It does turn out to be a good thing he did this, because it ends up saving them. He then reunites with Dumbledore, and honestly, I really like this moment in the movie.
You know, at times, I forget how much you've grown. At times, I still see the small boy from the cupboard. Forgive my mawkishness, Harry. I'm an old man.
You still look the same to me, sir.
Just like your mother, you're unfailingly kind. A trait people never fail to undervalue, I'm afraid.
In both versions, of course, Dumbledore asks Harry to give his word that he'll follow any order Dumbledore gives him.
Should I tell you to hide, you hide. Should I tell you to run, you run. Should I tell you to abandon me and save yourself, you must do so.
In the book, they leave the castle and go to Hogsmeade, out of range of the enchantments preventing apparition around Hogwarts. In the movie, well...
Being me has its privileges.
I love that, honestly. The whole cave scene is done really well, I think. First of all, it looks great. The set design is one of the consistently great things about these movies. The two of them make their way into the cave, with Dumbledore offering up his blood to open the entrance. There is a deleted scene here where Dumbledore explains to Harry the significance of the cave.
Where you stand, Harry, Tom Riddle once stood. Many, many years ago. One wintry afternoon, he lured 2 young classmates to this cave. What happened is unclear, but this much is known. The children were damaged.
I feel like this probably should have been capped. In the main part of the cave, Dumbledore finds a boat that they use to sail over the lake, where they find the Horcrux at the bottom of a basin full of potion. The movie did cut out one line from Dumbledore I really like when Harry spots an Inferius at the bottom of the lake.
There is nothing to be feared from a body, Harry, any more than there is anything to be feared from the darkness. Lord Voldemort, who of course secretly fears both, disagrees, but once again he reveals his own lack of wisdom. It is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness, nothing more.
Dumbledore works out that the potion has to be drunk.
You remember the conditions on which I brought you with me? This potion might paralyze me. Might make me forget why I'm here. Might cause me so much pain that I beg for relief. You are not to indulge these requests. It's your job, Harry, to make sure I keep drinking this potion, even if you have to force it down my throat.
I do feel like the book makes it a bit more clear that Dumbledore has tried many alternate methods of removing the potion and none worked. Thus, this really is the only option. That aside though, this part was done really well. It's incredibly heartbreaking in both versions, not only to see Dumbledore keep drinking a potion that is clearly causing him horrible agony, but also to see Harry having to keep feeding him this potion. Clearly Harry hates doing this, but it does show the strength of his resolve that he does it anyway. Also, Michael Gambon is amazing here. I really believe he is in incredible pain throughout this scene. To be honest, I don't know that I could see Richard Harris pulling this off as well. I do wish they had included some of Dumbledore's lines from the book during this scene, though.
It's all my fault. All my fault. Please make it stop. I know I did wrong. Oh, please make it stop. And I'll never again. Don't hurt them. Don't hurt them. Please. It's all my fault. Hurt me instead.
Clearly this is not just physical pain Dumbledore is experiencing. He's reliving horrible events from his past. In fact, as we learn in Deathly Hallows, he's remembering the moment Grindelwald turned on him and started hurting his brother and sister. Then the Inferi Attack, and again, this is done really well in the movie. They look suitably creepy and emaciated, and I love the moment Dumbledore conjures his fire to drive them away. It all looks great. They manage to grab the locket Horcrux and leave, and there's a line here in the book that I love. Remember how at the start of the book, when Harry seemed worried about them being attacked and Dumbledore said, "You're with me"? Well now, as they leave the cave, Dumbledore says,
I am not worried, Harry. I am with you.
There actually is a deleted scene in the movie where he says this line, and I'm not sure why they cut it.
I'm not worried, Harry. I'm with you.
Something the movie added, though, that I like is that we cut back to Hogwarts where the atmosphere is getting darker and we actually see the Death Eaters enter through the Vanishing Cabinet. I think that's pretty cool and makes things feel even more ominous. There is yet another deleted moment here, though, that I also think should have been kept. It's just a silent shot focusing on Snape as all of this is happening. This is significant because in hindsight, we know he's anticipating doing the thing he knows he's about to have to do. After tonight, he'll have killed the one man who truly trusted him, and all of his colleagues are going to think he's a traitor. Now, again, Harry and Dumbledore don't apparate directly back to Hogwarts in the book. They can't. Instead, Harry apparates them to Hogsmeade. He tells Dumbledore he'll find a place for him to stay while he gets Madame Pomfrey, but Dumbledore insists that it's Snape he really needs. And as we now know, this is not so Snape can heal him, but just the opposite, in fact. Dumbledore also has a moment of dry humor here.
That potion was no health drink.
Madame Myrtle runs up to them panicking and tells them that the dark mark has appeared over the Astronomy Tower at Hogwarts. Unlike in the movie, where Bellatrix cast it after Dumbledore was killed, here it was cast sooner, not, as we later learned, because someone had been killed, but to lure Dumbledore up there. Harry and Dumbledore take Madame Myrtle's brooms and fly up to the Astronomy Tower. On the tower, they hear footsteps coming up the stairs, and in the movie, Dumbledore has Harry hide below, while in the book, Dumbledore actually uses a freezing charm on Harry, who's under the invisibility cloak. His reason for doing this is twofold. Firstly, so that Harry won't act recklessly and get killed, and secondly, based on what we learn in Deathly Hallows, so that Harry won't try and stop Snape. Again, I prefer the book version. In the movie, it seems like Harry is just kind of standing there not doing anything. Yeah, Dumbledore told him to stay hidden, but still, it's another example of Harry's relative lack of agency in the movies. And yeah, he's outnumbered, but he could have at least gone for help. He could have done something. Whereas in the book, Harry's frozen and literally can't do anything. Well, in any case, Malfoy arrives and disarms Dumbledore, and here we learn what, at this point in the series, with all its twists and turns, is actually quite shocking. Harry has been completely right in his suspicions. Malfoy has been plotting to kill Dumbledore all year. He's been trying to repair the Vanishing Cabinet to let the Death Eaters in, and has finally succeeded in doing so. And when he doubted whether he would be able to do it, he resorted to desperate measures like the cursed necklace and the poisoned mead. Dumbledore figures out that Madame Rose Myrtle, under the influence of the Imperius curse, helped Draco with both those things, and Draco explains that he was using enchanted coins, an idea he got from the DA, to communicate with her. Dumbledore reveals that he knew all along that Draco was trying to kill him, but didn't confront him directly because he knew Draco would be killed if Voldemort knew Dumbledore knew what he was up to, so he ordered Snape to question him instead. We also get to see a new side to Draco that we got a glimpse of earlier in the bathroom, but now starts to come out in full. Until this book, Malfoy has always been a snobby, stuck-up, bigoted bully who was fully on board with the Death Eaters. But now that he's one of them, now that Voldemort has given him a job, he's being confronted with the horror of their actions firsthand, and finding it not as glamorous as he originally thought. Until now, he had always laughed off death when it happened to people he disliked or didn't care about.
The last time the Chamber of Secrets was opened, a mudblood died. So it's only a matter of time before one of them is killed this time. As for me, I hope it's Granger.
This is because he's never experienced it firsthand, and as he's finding out, it's quite different when it happens in front of you, and even more so when you're the one who has to do it. Dumbledore, of course, is sympathetic towards him, knowing it's not too late. His actions have not resulted in anyone's death, so he can still turn back from the path he's on. Clearly, he doesn't want to see another student go down the same road as Tom Riddle. He even brings this up in the movie.
Years ago, I knew a boy who made all the wrong choices. Please let me help you.
In fact, I think this scene was really well done in the movie. It's definitely shortened compared to the book version, but it still gets across the things that really matter. Tom Felton is just great here. You can tell he's completely in over his head and terrified.
I have to do this. I have to kill you. He's gonna kill me.
So the Death Eaters arrive on the tower, and it's worth noting that in the book, Bellatrix isn't present at this part. The Death Eaters are actually led by Corbin Yaxley, who hasn't shown up before now, but will be more prominent in Deathly Hallows. I really don't mind the decision to replace him with Bellatrix here. I assume they wanted to give Helena Bonham Carter more screen time, and she's great, so I have no problem with that. The other Death Eaters present are the Caro siblings, Amicus and Alecto, who will be important in the next book, and Fenrir Greyback, who of course has been mentioned several times in the book until now. In the movie, Thorfinn Rowell is also present, but in the book he's currently fighting the Order and Teachers down below. Unfortunately, all of these Death Eaters are pushed to the background in the movie and don't get any lines. I've already mentioned how Greyback was a victim of this. After all we've heard of him in the book, this is where we finally meet him. We knew from what we heard that he was vicious and evil, but as we learn here, he's gone beyond that. Apparently his taste for human flesh has reached a point where he now feasts on people even in human form. Even Draco seems terrified of him and admits he didn't want him to come. Greyback wasn't going to miss a chance to feed on all the kids here, though. The Caros likewise are pushed to the background here, even though they will be important in Deathly Hallows as they become teachers at Hogwarts under the new regime. It's particularly a shame because they got Ralph Ineson to play Amicus, and they couldn't even give him a line. So the Death Eaters try to push Draco to kill Dumbledore, but he can't seem to do it, and in the book there's a moment where Yaxley has to blast Greyback backwards to stop him killing Dumbledore himself. So, of course, we know what happens here. Snape arrives, and he's the one to kill Dumbledore. Now, the way this is done in the movie, I think hints a little too much that things aren't quite as they seem. I mean, we see Snape point his wand at Harry and then tell him to keep quiet. If he really is working for Voldemort, why not grab him here and deliver him to the Death Eaters? It definitely seems like something more is going on here. Even his face after killing Dumbledore looks like he's upset about what he just did. In the book, it really does seem like Snape has been a bad guy all along and legit just killed Dumbledore in cold blood. His face when looking at Dumbledore is described as being full of hatred and revulsion. Of course, in hindsight, this is likely self-loathing for what he's about to do. So Snape grabs Draco and the Death Eaters leave the tower with Harry in hot pursuit. Now, the movie for some reason completely cuts the battle here. The Death Eaters just walk out with no resistance. Well, aside from this one Auror who was blasted away immediately. We do get a scene with Bellatrix pretty much destroying the Great Hall, and I do like the look of horror on Malfoy's face as she does it.
Hogwarts. What a pathetic excuse for a school. I think I'd pitch myself off the Astronomy tower if I thought I'd continue for another 2 years.
But aside from that, the movie just rushes ahead to Harry's confrontation with Snape in the grounds. In the book, there's an actual battle here between the teachers and the Order and the Death Eaters. Hell, it's been underway even while the stuff on the tower has been happening. After Dumbledore is killed, Harry is released from his freezing charm. As the Death Eaters leave the tower, Harry hits Yaxley with a full body bind and runs after the others. He finds a battle going on with half the room having caved in. As Harry runs after Snape, he is attacked by Greyback, but manages to body bind him as well. He then sees Ginny dodging curse after curse from Amicus Caro and blasts him into a wall. Amicus recovers and flees along with his sister, who was defeated by McGonagall. Meanwhile, Thorfinn Rowell is blasting curses everywhere, causing chaos, so Harry hits him in the face with a spell, causing him to flee as well. Harry runs after them, taking advantage of the shortcuts he knows to catch up. He reaches the grounds where he catches up with Snape and Malfoy. Hagrid emerges from his hut to fight the Death Eaters, and Rowell engages him, firing curse after curse at him, but thanks to his giant blood, they all bounce off. Ultimately, Rowell is forced to set fire to Hagrid's hut, and Hagrid rushes to save Fang, allowing Rowell to escape. In the movie, Bellatrix sets fire to it, because, well, she's crazy. So Harry faces off against Snape, who blocks all of his spells with ease, though notably doesn't fight back, something Harry is quick to call him out on.
Fight back! You coward, fight back!
In the book, Snape actually takes exception to being called a coward, and this is the one time he actually retaliates. After everything he's done, spying on the most dangerous dark wizard in the world and killing the one person who fully trusted him, he obviously hates being called that. And of course, after Harry starts using Snape's own spells against him, Snape reveals that he's the Half-Blood Prince.
I'm the Half-Blood Prince.
In the movie, though, because of how little focus that plotline got, it's just kind of an, oh, okay then, kind of reveal. Now, one change made here that I understand, but also feels a bit too much of a hint, is that Snape simply leaves Harry. Again, if he's truly working for Voldemort, why? He does stop Harry from being tortured in the movie by Bellatrix and in the book by the Caros, using the excuse that Voldemort wants to kill Harry himself. But in that case, he could have grabbed Harry and taken him to Voldemort. The book does kind of sidestep this question by having Buckbeak charge at Snape, forcing him to run. So the possibility is still there that he would have done just that otherwise. In the movie, there's no reason for him not to do so, however, further hinting that things aren't what they seem. Now granted, there are hints in the book as well, but they're much more subtle. For example, as Snape is blocking Harry's spells, he sneers and says,
"Blocked again and again and again until you learn to keep your mouth shut and your mind closed, Potter."
On the surface, that seems like mocking, but he is kind of giving Harry advice on what he needs to do. Also, earlier, Snape shouted to the other Death Eaters,
"It's over. Time to go."
He's trying to call the Death Eaters away before anyone else gets hurt. So anyway, after Snape gets away, Harry runs to check on Hagrid, who emerges from his burning hut with Fang, who's still alive. The two of them put out the fire with water from their wands, and Harry tells Hagrid about Snape killing Dumbledore. Hagrid doesn't believe him, though, and says that Dumbledore probably told Snape to go with the Death Eaters to keep his cover. Of course, he actually turns out to be right. However, Hagrid soon learns the truth about Dumbledore's death, as he and Harry find the body, surrounded by other equally shocked people. And this is where the truth of it really hits Harry, too.
Harry had known there was no hope from the moment the body-bind curse Dumbledore had placed upon him lifted, known that it could have happened only because its caster was dead. But there was still no preparation for seeing him here, spread-eagled, broken, the greatest wizard Harry had ever or would ever meet. He gazed down at the wise old face and tried to absorb the enormous and incomprehensible truth that never again would Dumbledore speak to him. Never again could he help. I do love this moment they added to the movie where everyone lifts their wands out of respect for Dumbledore and in doing so clear the dark mark from the sky. That's some great visual storytelling. So Harry takes the locket from Dumbledore's body but finds that it's a fake with a letter inside it. To the Dark Lord, I know I will be dead long before you read this, but I want you to know that it was I who discovered your secret. I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as I can. I face death in the hope that when you meet your match, you will be mortal once more. R.A.B. Right now, all Harry takes from this is that the locket he and Dumbledore risked their lives to retrieve was a fake. But once he's somewhat pushed past his grief, he will of course set out to find out who R.A.B. is to track down the real Horcrux. Hagrid tries to pull Harry away from Dumbledore's body, but Harry doesn't want to leave, and in the end it's Ginny who pulls him away. He goes with her without argument. She takes him to the hospital wing, and along the way informs him that Neville was injured and Bill was attacked by Greyback. Upon arriving in the hospital, they find Ron, Hermione, Luna, Lupin, and Tonks, with Neville and Bill each asleep in a bed. Bill is so scarred he's unrecognizable. According to Lupin, because Greyback hadn't transformed, Bill won't become a werewolf, but the wounds will likely never heal, and he might have some wolfish characteristics. For example, as we later learn, he now has a liking for very rare steaks. Harry then informs all of them about Dumbledore's death, and Lupin in particular is horror-struck. Dumbledore was the one to help him deal with his condition at school and to give him a job when no one else would. They then start to hear Fawkes the Phoenix singing a mournful song. Somewhere out in the darkness, a phoenix was singing in a way Harry had never heard before. A stricken lament of terrible beauty, and Harry felt, as he had felt about Phoenix Song before, that the music was inside him, not without. It was his own grief turned magically into song that echoed across the grounds and through the castle windows. They listen to it until McGonagall enters. Harry tells her what happened, and she's completely shocked by what Snape did. That is something I do wish the movies could have shown more of, how Snape's betrayal affected his colleagues. While they probably weren't friends, I do believe McGonagall and the other teachers respected Snape and vice versa, so learning what he did can't have been easy for them. Not to mention for him having to make them all hate him. In addition to the betrayal itself, McGonagall, Lupin, and Tonks are shocked that Dumbledore could have been so wrong about Snape, and Harry tells them what Dumbledore said about Snape expressing remorse for causing the deaths of his parents.
And Dumbledore believed that? Dumbledore believed Snape was sorry James was dead? Snape hated James.
And he didn't think my mother was worth a damn either, because she was Muggle-born. Mudblood, he called her.
Well, not quite, Harry. Still one piece of the puzzle you're missing. McGonagall starts to blame herself, as she had sent Professor Flitwick to tell Snape about the Death Eaters having entered the castle. The others then go into detail on what went down at the start of the battle. Ron, Ginny, and Neville had been keeping watch on the Room of Requirement like Harry told them to, but Malfoy and the Death Eaters slipped past them using Peruvian instant darkness powder. Thankfully, the three of them found the Order members almost immediately, and they caught up with the Death Eaters. During the battle, one of the Death Eaters, named Gibbon, ran up the Astronomy Tower where he conjured the Dark Mark to lure Dumbledore, and as he was heading back down to rejoin the battle, a rogue killing curse from Thorfinn Rowell hit him by accident. Meanwhile, Hermione and Luna were watching Snape's office when Flitwick came running, shouting about Death Eaters in the castle. He ran into Snape's office, and Snape knocked him out. He then ran out of the office and told Hermione and Luna that Flitwick had collapsed and that they should go help him, which they did. This is actually another hint about what's really going on, though. Hermione had drunk some of the Lucky Potion, so shouldn't that have warned her not to listen to Snape? No, because the lucky thing was to let Snape succeed. On top of that, it kept her and Luna out of the fight. Speaking of which, according to Ginny, thanks to the Lucky Potion she and Ron drank, everything seemed to just miss them. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley then arrive, along with Fleur, all of them panicking over Bill. Mrs. Weasley starts crying over her son's condition, especially since he was about to get married. This sets Fleur off, who angrily informs Mrs. Weasley that she doesn't care about the scars. If anything, they're proof of his bravery, and that she still loves him and still plans to marry him. This response seems to significantly change Mrs. Weasley's opinion of Fleur, as she offers to let Fleur borrow a tiara for the wedding, and the two of them start crying into each other's arms. This is the moment where Tonks then reveals her love for Lupin, angrily pointing out to him that Fleur doesn't care about Bill being bitten, and that it's the same with her. Lupin is still against the idea, considering himself too dangerous, and tries to change the topic by bringing up Dumbledore's death, to which McGonagall responds,
Dumbledore would have been happier than anyone to think that there was a little more love in the world.
McGonagall then brings Harry up to the headmaster's office. Since she was deputy headmistress, she's now headmistress, so that office is hers. Upon reaching the office, Harry sees that Dumbledore's portrait has now joined the other former headmasters. McGonagall questions Harry on what he and Dumbledore were doing when they left the castle, but following Dumbledore's orders, Harry doesn't tell her. He does, however, inform her that Madame Rosmerta is under the Imperious Curse. Hagrid, Professor Sprout, Professor Flitwick, and Professor Slughorn then arrive. After Slughorn expresses his shock about Snape's betrayal, the teachers discuss what should be done about Hogwarts now, as the murder of the headmaster at the hands of a teacher will be a major black mark against the school. Ultimately, they decide to let the school governors decide. They then discuss transport home for the students, but Harry convinces them that Dumbledore should have a funeral and that the students should be allowed to stay for that. He's then dismissed from the office. The movie doesn't show any of this, but there is a very brief interaction between Harry and McGonagall.
You should know, Professor Dumbledore. You meant a great deal to him.
I think that works well enough for the movie. Harry returns to his dormitory where he finds Ron and tells him what happened in the cave and about finding the fake Horcrux, and he shows him the letter from R.A.B. Harry is still too grief-stricken to care about who R.A.B. is, though. The final scene in the movie is the trio on top of the Astronomy Tower. Harry and Hermione discuss Draco, with Harry admitting he doesn't think he would have killed Dumbledore, something Harry also acknowledges in the book in his internal narration. Harry informs the other two that the Horcrux was fake and shows them the note from R.A.B. He informs them that he's not coming back to Hogwarts next year as he has to finish what Dumbledore started, and Hermione insists that she and Ron are going with him.
I've always admired your courage, Harry. But sometimes you can be really thick. I don't really think you're going to be able to find all those Horcruxes by yourself, do you?
The film ends with Harry saying,
I never realised how beautiful this place was.
As they watch Fawkes the Phoenix fly away. I honestly do really like this scene and think it's a good way to end the movie. I am disappointed that they didn't include Dumbledore's funeral, but like I said, that moment where they all raise their wands is pretty damn cool. If I had one problem with this scene though, it's Ron being sidelined again. I mean, why are Harry and Hermione talking together while Ron sits in the back? Why doesn't he get a single line in this scene? Why aren't he and Hermione together expressing their determination to accompany Harry on his quest? Why is it just Hermione? Despite my issues with Ron's portrayal in the movies, I really don't think the writers have anything against him, but this is one decision I just can't rationalize. In the book, we see that while most students are staying for the funeral, several of them, like the Patil twins and Zacharias Smith, have been rushed home by their parents. Seamus's mom also wanted to bring him home, but he refused, and after a shouting match, she gave in. Now that Harry has moved past the grief a little, he, Ron, and Hermione have been looking into R.A.B., but without any luck. Hermione, however, does discover that Eileen Prince, who she had learned about before, was Snape's mother, who married a muggle named Tobias Snape and then gave birth to a son. At school, Severus played up his magical half, the Prince side, and called himself the Half-Blood Prince to get in with the purebloods like Lucius Malfoy. Harry notes how similar this is to Voldemort, who similarly changed his name to cut himself off from his muggle side.
He broke off, looking out of the window. He could not stop himself dwelling upon Dumbledore's inexcusable trust in Snape. But as Hermione had just inadvertently reminded him, he, Harry, had been taken in just the same. In spite of the increasing nastiness of those scribbled spells, he had refused to believe ill of the boy who had been so clever, who had helped him so much.
Even Hermione, though, admits that she never would have guessed the prince was an actual murderer, and interestingly, Ron chimes in, saying that as much as they all hated Snape, none of them really thought he would do that. Dumbledore's funeral takes place, and a large number of people show up for it. Of course, there are the students, teachers, and Order members already at Hogwarts, including Lupin and Tonks, who are holding hands. Seems he finally let her convince him. And of course, the Weasley twins are there. Among the other guests are Mad-Eye Moody, Kingsley Shacklebolt, Madame Maxime, Tom, the Leaky Cauldron barman, Mrs. Fig, Aberforth Dumbledore, though we don't know yet that's who he is, the bass player from the Weird Sisters, Ernie, the night bus driver, Madame Malkin from the robe shop in Diagon Alley, and the witch pushing the trolley on the Hogwarts Express. Even Grop is there and seems pretty well behaved as he comforts a crying Hagrid. Several Ministry people are there as well. Rufus Scrimgeour is there, of course, along with Percy Weasley, Cornelius Fudge, and... Dolores Umbridge. Rita Skeeter's there too, with her notebook at the ready. A man gives a speech, but Harry doesn't really pay attention as he's busy reminiscing on his own experiences with Dumbledore. And as he does so, the reality of Dumbledore's death finally hits him like a ton of bricks as he thinks about all the things he'll never be able to ask or say to him, and he starts crying. But rather than letting it defeat him, it seems to make him determined not to let anyone protect him anymore. Now he has to protect himself. And Harry saw very clearly as he sat there under the hot sun how people who cared about him had stood in front of him one by one. His mother, his father, his godfather, and finally Dumbledore, all determined to protect him. But now that was over. He could not let anybody else stand between him and Voldemort. He must abandon forever the illusion he ought to have lost at the age of 1, that the shelter of a parent's arms meant that nothing could hurt him. There was no waking from his nightmare, no comforting whisper in the dark that he was safe, really, that it was all in his imagination. The last and greatest of his protectors had died, and he was more alone than he had ever been before. During the funeral, the Mer people also emerged from the lake to pay their respects to Dumbledore by singing a mournful song, and the Centaurs do so as well by emerging from the forest and firing their bows into the air. At the end of the speech, Dumbledore is magically encased inside a white marble tomb. Following this, Harry actually breaks up with Ginny, knowing that if they're together, Voldemort will use her to get to him. She takes it pretty well and admits that this stupid noble side of him is part of the reason she likes him so much. Once Harry is alone by the lake, Rufus Scrimgeour approaches him and acts sympathetic towards him over his huge loss, but Harry is having none of it and bluntly asks Scrimgeour what he wants. Scrimgeour wants to know where Harry went with Dumbledore the night he died, but like with McGonagall, Harry refuses to talk. And I love this moment where he quotes Dumbledore's line from Chamber of Secrets. He will only be gone from the school when none here are loyal to him. Scrimgeour tries once again to get Harry to be essentially a mascot for the Ministry, but once again Harry shoots him down, and once again proudly confirms Scrimgeour's accusation of him being Dumbledore's man through and through. After Scrimgeour leaves, Harry is joined by Ron and Hermione, and they have a conversation very similar to the one at the end of the movie, except this time Ron is actually involved, as Harry tells them he's not returning to Hogwarts next year, but will be looking for the Horcruxes. He does go into a bit more detail here, though, as he says he's going to go back to the Dursleys one more time because of the magical protection around the place, and after that he wants to visit Godric's Hollow, the place where his parents died, as that was where everything began for him. Ron and Hermione, of course, make it clear that they'll be with him the whole way, and Ron reminds him of Bill and Fleur's upcoming wedding, saying that they should attend that before anything else. The idea that something as normal and happy as a wedding could still exist lifts Harry's spirits considerably. And that's Half-Blood Prince. Not a bad movie by any means, but like Goblet of Fire, I think it ultimately fails as an adaptation of its source material. However, whereas the cuts and changes in Goblet of Fire I feel only really weak in that specific movie, this movie made cuts and changes that will also have an impact on the final 2 movies. Join me next time as we look at Deathly Hallows Part 1.